Good morning. It's Sunday, the 12th of December, and it's one of those mornings at 9 o'clock where I can hear the owls hooting outside. We're that much in the depths of winter. If you're joining me today, you're really welcome. If you're watching this on catch up, you're welcome to post any of your questions in comments feeds if I posted the video. Obviously, if you're here live, you can ask questions in real time about anything to do with primary maths education. My theme for today is inspired by an email I got this week from Boaler about the California reforms and a podcast that she'd done about them. I found them really interesting and I've decided to do a podcast on this because I think I have some insights and clarity of thought to add to this discussion if anybody's interested. The joy of live streaming on YouTube or publishing videos on YouTube is that you can take it or leave it. But I hope if you're passionate about this debate, you will stick with me because it is my life, the challenges of improving maths education and the reality of trying to do it. Hi, I can see a few people have joined me. If you'd like to say hi or ask a question, that would be really welcome. So I think the first thing I need to say is that Boaler is an amazing woman. She has a huge amount to offer. She's incredibly resilient. I'm really proud as a woman of the way she stands up and defends her views. You get a lot of abuse for doing that, and often if you're a critic of that person, you're really balanced, considered and thoughtful in your views, and you don't notice that there are some people who aren't that way who will be attacking the same person. It's really tough to do. And I'm also passionate about some of the things she's trying to achieve. But I have some different insights about the challenges of doing that and the complexity of doing it and some of the ways of overcoming some of those hurdles, which is what I'm here to talk about today. So there is this new proposed California framework, not a curriculum, a framework to complement the Common Core standards that Jo's been involved in. And my first criticism would come straight from Hamilton. It's too many damn pages for any man to understand. It's so long. And I think one of the reasons for that is that while Jo is describing something very real and something very important, she hasn't developed a skill in putting some of it into really clear and succinct language. So I first corresponded with Jo between 2006 and 2008 when she was back in the UK for a while, and I was a head of secondary maths, high school maths, in a school with many challenges, and I was implementing, that her original book was this one, Experiencing School Maths, that contrasted and brought to life contradictions that were going on in the UK maths system, where some schools were using traditional maths teaching and some were using progressive maths teaching. And as a head of maths, I had to use the progressive style because I was working in a school with so many challenges. You just couldn't teach the kids in ordinary ways. And so I was doing that and it was having amazing results, and I invited her in, but she was in Sussex and I was in just near Whitehaven. And if you do the Google mapping, it doesn't work at all. It's horrendous. And then, well, Ofsted came into my school and caused the usual damage, and Jo had to go back to America. So it never happened, which is a real shame because I was trying to make these things, bring these things to life then. And that was 15 years ago and we've still never had that conversation. I looked after Jo when she started to talk about bullying in my LinkedIn group, which is math education, math culture, if any of you are on LinkedIn and haven't joined that group. And also if you want to link to me, I'm easy to find, Rebecca Hanson, FCCT. Please add a message because I won't pick up your request to link if I don't know you, unless you explain in a message why I should. Right, so background in a circle. This debate is, and always has been, really about traditional versus progressive teaching. And progressive is not a woke term. It's a really technical maths teaching term where you are allowing, in traditional teaching, the curriculum is pre-written and in small steps, lesson by lesson. With progressive teaching, you're working with groups, so you can't assume they're all at the same place, or you're not assuming they're all at the same place. They have different gaps in their learning, and therefore you're teaching in a way that allows children to progress even if they've got huge gaps in their learning and the class in front of you are all in different places. So it's not a term that cross-applies to a tutoring situation where you're working one-to-one or with very small groups. It's about classroom teaching. And progressive teaching is about teaching in ways that don't require all the children to be at the same place and have the same background in learning. And it's also called low floor, high ceiling teaching. So this is about traditional teaching where the curriculum is pre-written, it's really logical in clear steps, everybody knows what's going on, it's very transparent, and the assumption is that all the children have done the same previous knowledge and understood it, and they're ready to take the next step. And if they're not, then you set them or stream them to cope with that, and that you can do that reasonably, versus progressive teaching where those assumptions don't exist, and so you have to teach in low floor, high ceiling ways. And there are really two types of low floor, high ceiling teaching. One is to use a context, a real world context that all the children understand, and the maths is embedded in that, and the deep understanding of the context creates a hook that allows the children to decode the maths much better because they're engaged and they want to puzzle out the maths. The other type of low floor, high ceiling teaching is structural and is based on using patterns, visuals, structures of maths. And the reason that works is that the assumption of traditional teaching that all the children are in the same place is always deeply flawed, because there are many ways of understanding maths. So even if all the children can do the same problems, they haven't necessarily understood the same maths. Right back to, I don't know, if you're doing odd and even numbers with 5-year-olds, you get some teachers who teach even numbers as being two equal groups and do lots of visuals and art with young children associated with that. And some children who teach even numbers as being exact numbers of groups of 2 or pairs and do lots of work associated with that, and they don't realise there's a clash. So there are these problems with traditional teaching where even if you think, because you've tested them, that all the children understand the same things, that's not true. And one of the ways of teaching low floor, high ceiling teaching or progressive teaching is to work with the structures that embrace all the ways that children do maths deliberately. Now, I know I am simplifying things, but often you need to simplify things to really get to grips with them, and then we can recomplicate them. So what are the real criticisms of both types of teaching? Well, with traditional teaching, everybody knows what's going on. It's really well established. It's a clearly trodden track. And it makes it easy to set targets, and setting targets can be brilliant for children in some circumstances. Some love it and some need it to get a bit of a kicking that brings them into focus. We know that from experience. Some teachers and some students really like traditional teaching where maths is just about the maths. And it's perfect, and you know when you've got it right. And with traditional teaching, it's really easy for parents to get involved. Well, it's not always easy if the children have been taught in a different way to how the parents want to teach it, which does happen. But it's generally quite easy for parents to help if they're really good at maths, or to get tutors if their children are struggling and they want to help. And all those things are really positive things. But then if you look at the benefits of progressive or low floor, high ceiling teaching, it's brilliant when there are lots of the children have different backgrounds in understanding maths or have big holes in their teaching. It really, really is. It changes lives. I've been there as a head of maths. You get this incredible student progress that you never see with traditional teaching, because that's about small steps. So a child who's doing well is a child who's made a year's progress in a year, because that's what you're planning for. With progressive low floor, high ceiling teaching, you really do suddenly get children progressing by 4 years progress, and everything just comes into focus and they're on top of it and they can do it, and this buzz of what happens is just amazing. They come to life. They're so just so alive. It's a joy to watch as a teacher. That does happen with some students, and it is an advantage of that type of teaching. Some students and teachers really, really like it. I mean, you can see in my eyes that it's amazing when it works, because of the impact on students, and it's often done in context that students really understand. Some children just need the change from the traditional style that hasn't worked for them, but sometimes you can do really applied projects that are preparing them for the real world, or just the art in the maths and the patterns can really work. Big advantage of this type of teaching is that you're really developing the whole character of the student. There is an assumption that they are wallowing in situations they don't understand, and that's normal in maths. Puzzling with complex problems, getting used to not having a clue what's going on, and developing the skills of working it out, planning, longer work, working in teams, collaborating, developing the skills that go with that, sometimes explaining your own thinking in a context where you don't necessarily know whether it's right or not, and learning to listen to each other and puzzle things out. They are all great life skills that are taught through progressive styles of teaching, which are taught generally less through traditional styles. You generally get much more highly skilled teachers, because when they're working in this environment, they're constantly challenged, because they're listening to how children do and struggle with maths, and it requires them to experience those many different perspectives on the same maths very quickly and make sense of them. So it upskills the teachers. But there are some problems here, because I've always thought there were some things that Jo missed, which is what I wanted to talk to her about 15 years ago, and have tried to talk to her about a few times since and failed. And that is that when I say these teachers become more highly skilled, there's two ways you can get there. One is by dumping them in a progressive situation, detract, unset it, and they just have to learn them. But that's very, very messy, because often the teaching is quite chaotic at first, and the children who hit it first are disadvantaged by it, while the teachers and the school get their head around it, and it can lead to all sorts of arguments in the community around it, because some parents are aware that their children are not getting as good experience as they might have had if this hadn't happened. But the other way is to capture in detail what it is that these teachers who are doing this know about maths education, that the teachers who are following prescripted traditional approaches don't know. And that's what I've been trying to capture deliberately for the last 8 years, since 2013. And it's all about these structures that teach all the mathematical methods together that I've focused on, because that's what the teachers who've been doing this for years have had, that I've noticed that I felt people needed. So I've been sharing those in my videos. It's just a project. It's not a money-making thing, not a commercial thing. It's just a passion, because I know how much it matters and I know how much it works. But they're here in the videos tab if you want them, or if you go to the About tab, you can link to a link that lists them all, so you can find them your way around them much better. And the other thing that I found as a head of maths who was, head of maths is a curriculum leader in a secondary school, was that you didn't have to choose one or the other, the traditional approach or the progressive approach anymore, once technology had come along. Because I was using low floor, high ceiling teaching with my students a lot of the time, but about half the time they were working on personalised learning curriculums where they were learning the traditional approach, but through online lessons that we could all track and trace. So we had both going on together. And I wanted to show Joe that in action, of how amazing it was, how powerful it was, that these students were empowered to take control of their own learning of the traditional curriculum, to set themselves targets with my help, and we could all see what was going on and precisely how that was working. And of course, what's happened is that some of these structural ways of teaching mathematics that came out of the progressive teaching genre have fed back into the traditional curriculum. So by accessing these really well considered curriculums, some of them are in textbooks and they've been positively influenced by this understanding, and some of them are online. Certainly in the UK we've got some amazing stuff online by Colin Hegarty, who went through Virgin Voom with me and got funding to do this. And there's others coming, there's other systems similar that are really well considered. So there are ways of integrating all these things that come from the 21st century, very much the post-communication technology era. And when I was a head of maths between 2006 and 2008, I got the early use of those, but they're much more established now. So we need thinking about maths that really understands that. Quick side note, why was progressive teaching eradicated in England? It wasn't because it wasn't good. It was because of Ofsted, which was a regulatory body that didn't understand it, and the standards weren't written for it. And when schools, the standards didn't recognise it, so schools that used it tend to be negatively rated, and there were horrific consequences of that, which some of us faced head on. It was gruesome. And we were about to get that properly reformed and sorted out in 2010, when we suddenly had political leadership that decided to stop that process and use Ofsted to force horrific things onto schools. And so those improvements went, and also decided to get rid of experts in education and consultation. So the fact that progressive teaching has been wiped out in England is nothing to do with anything rational or sensible at all. I mean, they created a narrative which pretended, that rewrote history and pretended that progressive teaching had been about letting kids do whatever they want with no structure and no oversight, which was just nonsense. What else? Yeah, some of the criticisms that have come of these reforms are that they are woke, that it's about racial equality. That is nonsense. It's about... And we see the same narrative. Some people do use it for racial reasons because it tends to be the case that people from ethnic minorities have different learning experiences or more gaps in their learning, and their parents can't necessarily get them tutors or help them themselves, which helps on the traditional side. So there's a bit of that. But I've been working in areas of the UK where there are no ethnic minorities, and there's none of those issues. And the reality is that this type of teaching just helps children who have gaps in their learning, whatever their racial background. And that's particularly relevant after COVID, when some students haven't been able to learn effectively at home for all sorts of reasons, including from middle-class parents who are just working incredibly hard and didn't have time to teach their children and didn't necessarily know the math to teach them. So the woke stuff is just no. Anyone who's using that kind of attack, just disregard them, because it's not appropriate. If they want to talk to me, they're really welcome to talk to me, but I bet they won't. There's another criticism which is about progress to university. Well, these progressive approaches came from a much more chaotic background, chaotic in that teachers were doing forensically what they thought was right for them, and that was proved not to be a problem. But I see that the logic hasn't been laid out for those people. When you're doing... Children get much more enthusiastic and skilled in engaging with mathematics, and it helps them overcome any gaps in their learning which appear. And I don't think I've got access to the research which proves that. But for me, in my school that I went to, it used to be the case that to get into the elite maths, the elite STEM subjects, you needed to do further maths A-level, and you would do that at 18, which meant you had to pull back your A-level to 17 instead of 18, where most people do it, your maths A-level. And then those people did an extension of their O-level when they were 16, which most people did their O-level when they were 16, so they had to do their O-level at 15. And suddenly, between 15 and 16, we just worked on extended maths projects of our own devising and played a lot of cards, I seem to remember. So the logic was that we wouldn't then be able to access A-level maths and A-level further maths because we'd done very little. I mean, we just hadn't covered the material at all, the content. But our school had traditionally never had more than a couple of children in a year attempting further maths A-level. And in my year, I think there were like 9, and 6 of us got places at Oxbridge. Just because we'd come to love maths and saw ourselves as being mathematically able, resilient, independent, and able to deal with whatever else anyone else was dealing with. So we just got on with it and did it. So that's evidence from me. I know it's not robust research evidence. Hi, if you're still watching, your questions are very welcome, or if you just want to say hi. But when you're working with context and project-led maths, at least some of the time, there is a huge opportunity for those outside of schools who want to influence it to provide resources and materials that can be used in those situations and can inspire children to want to do computing, electronics, STEM subjects, higher level maths, and can lay the foundations, the mathematical foundations at the same time for that. It really does work. I think the people who are raising those concerns, there's a problem in that your concerns could do with being addressed more explicitly, and I'm trying to do that now. And the pathways for engagement could be more clearly laid out. But please don't worry too much about that. And the final point is just, if you're a parent and you're worried about your child, you know, often if you're in the front line of tough state school education, the top sets are the safe zone for your child. If you've got a child who's really passionate about learning, the top sets are where they meet the other children like them, and they don't have to hide themselves, and they don't have to know that if they talk about the subject with the teacher openly in front of the class, they're going to be hated by the people around them. So these reforms, a lot of it seems to pivot on the detracking, and it doesn't need to. Maybe, so if you're a teacher, if you're a parent and are concerned about this, you know, maybe look at detracking 1 year later to help the teachers learn the skills, or having limited tracking just to address specific needs within that community that you're aware of. But this isn't dependent on detracking this type of teaching. It's just that in the past, that's how the teachers learnt skills to do this much better way of teaching. And there is a gap here in that we need to see out there the training. It can be made visible, like mine on my YouTube channel, for how we upskill teachers. But mine is just about the structures, and I've only shared stuff up to it's about age 12 in the US. I do have stuff beyond that. But we also need to see the exemplification of the project-led maths learning that's so fabulous. And I think if that was really out there with demonstration of the materials, the teacher training out there, and people talking about how it's worked, then this would be going a lot better. Good luck to all of you involved. Treat each other with kindness and respect all the time, and always sideline people who don't do that from either side, because you're really lucky you've got a vibrant and open debate, which we no longer have in the UK and haven't had for 11 years. And it's really grim. Okay. Good luck. Bye.